I'm joined here on the Presilience Podcast by the General Manager of the Cybertech Institute of Australia. Joining me once again, this time on his own, Mr. Dave Cohen. Dave, thanks for joining us.
Morning, Joe, and great to be with you again.
Yeah, it's fantastic to have a more focused chat. Obviously, you were part of our panel discussion recently on some of the implications for Australia with the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. But today we're talking about something a little bit different, still obviously in your wheelhouse. Now, as the General Manager of the Cybertech Institute of Australia, you specialize in upskilling and reskilling Australians to enter into the cyberspace when it comes to cybersecurity and different cyber literacy programs. And it's something that's obviously very topical. For those of us that are listening that might be from the critical infrastructure area, you'll be well aware that under the new SOCI, Security Critical Infrastructure legislation, that more and more organizations now have responsibilities to be proactive with their cybersecurity and reporting any adverse incidents. So it is something that is now becoming mandated. And I think that's probably led to quite a number of entities out there, either in the critical infrastructure space or not, that are starting to scratch their heads or maybe the right phrase might be pulling their head out of the sand and realizing that if they don't do something proactively, the government might tell them to. So I think this is something that a lot of businesses are talking about now from a risk point of view, and also just from a learning development, upskilling, general business continuity point of view. So Dave, I guess probably the first question I have for you is, you're fairly new to Australia. You've been here, I think, 4 months. What's been your observation about Australian businesses when it comes to their maturity, when looking at cyber? But also, what's the attitude? Are we still kind of playing, she'll be right, mate, it'll be fine, nothing bad's going to happen here, or are we starting to wake up?
So I think you've nailed it. And, one of the things that I've learned about Australia in the very short time that I've been here is exactly that approach, is the approach of, exactly, I'll be all right, mate, rather than, let's try and be proactive and let's try and mitigate the situation before it unfolds. I almost use the approach of building a home entertainment center in your home before you put the roof on, because you want the home entertainment center, but you don't have a roof on it. So you run the risk of a rainstorm coming down and taking out your home entertainment center. And that's sort of the approach that we're feeling. And I'm going to touch on a survey that was actually conducted by Tech Targets recently, and they revealed the results of the survey that they had undertaken across a broad spectrum of companies that they had surveyed. And the survey was the ANZ 2022 IT Priority Survey results. And Joe, 52% of companies had acknowledged that security and risk management was more important to them for the future of their organizations since the COVID pandemic had started. So now that's an overwhelming majority. The interesting stat is that the most popular projects that companies were undertaking currently in 2022, where did security and risk management fall? Last place, number 18.
Wow.
So whereas companies acknowledge the need to practice security and risk management processes, they're still adopting the let's wait and see what happens to me, mate. Out of the 18 categories, Joe, security and risk was listed as the 18th top priority project to be undertaken in 2022.
Wow, that's incredible. Yet everyone agrees that it's the most important, but it's the one that's getting the least love.
Correct. And that's exactly it. We wouldn't buy a Ferrari and leave it outside in the road. We would, if we bought a Ferrari, we would make sure that we have a garage to put it in. Not to say that anything's going to happen out in the road, and it's the same as our businesses. Not to say that anything's going to happen to your business, but you want to be prepared. This is your livelihood. This is your sustenance. If you're a business owner, it's you have a responsibility to staff. And just as you have a responsibility to your staff and the community in which you provide, so too is being security prudent and resilient, almost a responsibility. And the fact that critical infrastructure has been mandated with certain legislation on how they're reporting the cybersecurity landscape, that will filter down through businesses.
Yeah, and that's I think that's a really good point, and it's why I led in with that in the introduction. I mean, we're seeing now that critical infrastructure, or those that are identified as being part of the critical infrastructure of Australia, now have mandated requirements. And look, those that were proactive in that space, this legislation isn't big and scary because they were already kind of doing the right things. And this is more just I guess probably an exercise in compliance now, just to make sure that they are actually on the right track and that everything's standardized. But those that did take a bit of a she'll be right, we don't have money for that right now. Maybe next quarter, maybe next financial year, maybe after the next 3 years, maybe we'll reprioritize that. Now they're having to scramble. And I think there's a lesson there for businesses as a whole. Even if you don't fall under that legislation currently, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think that perhaps at some point, if enough bad things happen, that it will become mandated. And it's probably better to be ahead of the curve than chasing up afterwards. So one of the questions I have for you, Dave, because a lot of organizations, their knee-jerk response is, I need to go and pay someone to do this for me or to fix this problem for me. But one of the things that I know you're experiencing with CTIA is a really interesting increase in both upskilling and reskilling. Do you want to talk firstly, what's the difference between upskilling and reskilling, and how have you found that process?
So as I've gone through that process, Joe, it's a very interesting question that, in its traditional sense and in its, sort of colloquial sense, upskilling is taking someone that's upskilled with a particular skill and furthering their education and furthering their progression throughout their career. Reskilling is taking an individual that has no experience in a particular field, giving them the tools, giving them the education, giving them the training, and allowing them to progress into a new chosen field that they previously never had experience in. However, what we're finding at the moment is that we have such a skills shortage and a skills gap in Australia. So a skills shortage is a skills shortage and upskilling, reskilling go hand in hand, and a skills gap and upskilling go hand in hand. But what we're doing in Australia is, because we recognize that cybersecurity is such a prevalent problem in Australia, we're educating and we are reskilling with the wrong skills. So we're providing a builder with bricks and cement, but not teaching them how to apply the bricks and cement. We're not teaching them how to use the tools that we're equipping them with. So now we're creating a bigger skills gap. Whereas before we never had enough people in the industry, now we're getting people into the industry, but without the required skills level. So unfortunately, the people that are getting into the industry through less effective means are now in the industry, and they find themselves in the same position as they were in before, unable to find work because companies are not employing them because they don't have the necessary skill set. So it's important when getting an education in cybersecurity that you've done your homework to make sure that the program that you're enlisting in is fit for the job that you have your eye on, is fit for the work that you do. So you're almost going to put the cart before the horse almost and say, that's the job that I want. What do I need to be able to do to get that job? And what level of skill do I need to have to be able to get that job? And what studying do I need to do? And then find the right course that will get you that job. Because cybersecurity is a massive, massive landscape. I get a lot of questions. What job can I get once I've entered the field of cybersecurity? And the truth is that, how long is a piece of string type scenario is you can go into any field of cybersecurity that your heart desires, at whatever level your heart desires. If you want to progress through the ranks of cybersecurity, you start off as a cybersecurity analyst and then make your way up into forensics, analysis, penetration testing, etc., etc. If you prefer to stay as a cybersecurity analyst, that's your choice. And it doesn't only have to be in an IT world. Banks need cybersecurity, insurance companies, medical companies, the defense needs, government. There is literally no end to the type of environment that needs cybersecurity specialists. And that's at any sort of level, but with the correct skill set to be able to apply it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you're making. It's certainly, I know from my own personal experience, I looked into cyber maybe 10 years ago. I think I was looking for work at the time, and I started looking at all the different security roles, and everything security related that was paying a decent wage had elements of InfoSec or cyber. And I didn't really have a background in that. So I immediately thought, well, if I want to be able to do those things, I need to go and get at least an undergrad, if not postgrad qualifications in cyber. Or systems or computer science or something like that to be able to get into those roles. And then I actually remember spending a whole weekend diving into these different university level qualifications that I could apply for, and looking at the subject matters and looking at the prerequisites and looking at the assumed knowledge, and this is beyond me. Like, by the time I caught up with the amount of assumed knowledge to get started, I would be so far behind, especially as a 30-year-old in a class full of 18-year-olds and doing undergrad that have grown up learning how to do programming in high school. Like, how do I become competitive in that area? So I became overwhelmed, and I basically just left it and ignored it and said, that's never going to be my thing. I'm never going to be able to stay current with it. But one of the things I've learned just in recent times, getting to know you and the offerings at CTIA, is actually how accessible different elements of cyber are, even if you don't have a computer science background or a coding background. There's so much to it. And I think those of us that are outside that bubble don't always realize how accessible some of those skills are.
Joe, if I'm going to segue into that, that's such an important point that you raised there. Cybersecurity, unfortunately, has a brand associated to it and a stigma and a persona attached to it. And, we all know the majority of ads that we see for cybersecurity is the faceless individual with the hoodie on in a dark environment. That's sort of the brand of cybersecurity. And to a lot of people, that sort of imagery is unattractive, which sort of discounts a large proportion of skilled individuals and are worthy individuals that would make a successful career move in cybersecurity. All cybersecurity is not to be able to know how to program. It's not to be able to be, you don't have to have a basement. You don't have to have a dungeon. You don't have to own a hoodie. You don't have to own any of these things to become a cybersecurity analyst. All you have to do is have a brain that enables critical thinking, comprehension of instructions, general reasoning, and to be able to process a sequence. So these are the skills, and there are so many people that possess these skills on such a higher level that go unnoticed. We've got a lot of individuals that are sort of unfortunately lost in companies and lost in businesses, in departments that, they were sort of there because that's where they were last year and don't really, know where else to go, that possess the skills to enter cyber. And Joe, if I'm going to touch on, I may be out of context here, but if I'm going to touch on Amanda, your wife, here was a lady who was in our marketing department who by chance did a pre-program assessment that we ask all our students to do. Amanda knocked the lights out of the pre-program assessment. She scored a higher percentage on the pre-program assessment than anyone to date. I've done the assessment. It's a highly intense assessment time-wise. You're under immense time pressures, and you're certainly not expected to answer all the questions in every section because of the time constraints that you put under. But here, Amanda got 100% in certain areas. Now, here's this highly skilled individual that you would never assume to go into cybersecurity, and yet we are privileged now to be able to say that Amanda's on the cybersecurity program, and she's excited about going on the program. And we're excited as anything to be able to take a person with an unfound passion for cybersecurity and break the bias and break the stereotype of, here's a person that was in marketing who's now got a new career path in cybersecurity. It's a phenomenal trait to be able to have. So we need to sort of manipulate this brand and change this brand of the type of individual that's in our organizations, and have a look around and ask someone to put their hand up and say, hey guys, who wants to go into cybersecurity? You can still carry on with your current role if you love your job, if you want to learn something new, and the benefits for the company are immense. The benefits for the individual are immense because the individual is becoming more indisposable. The company is getting an on-hand resource of a cybersecurity analyst. And right now that is priceless because a lot of companies cannot afford to bring on a new cybersecurity analyst. And why I'm going on about a cybersecurity analyst, because as we spoke about Soki earlier in terms of critical infrastructure, there is going to be that mandate of companies to have someone on the ground But we need to go far beyond that box checking exercise. This is a company that we're dealing with. It's our livelihood, it's our passion, it's our dreams. It's, it's what people have invested their lives in. Many employees rely on their places of work to put shelter, a roof over their head, to put food on their table, to put clothes on their back, to, keep their children safe and warm. So a company is more than just a place of business. A company is a place of security. It's a place of shelter. And as human beings, we need that in our lives. So to be able to take a gamble and to take a risk, and smaller companies, unfortunately, may not be able to recover from a cyber breach. And larger companies have bigger targets on their backs because they're more well-known and they've got greater resources. So while as smaller companies may not be as bigger targets, their costs of potentially recovering from a cyber breach are far greater. So the cost of bringing a cybersecurity specialist into an environment is immense. It's high. So use a resource within your organization. Upskill them. What is the cost, Joe, of a company having to close their doors where they could have spent a couple of grand in upskilling a cybersecurity specialist? Someone on hand that doesn't know how to deal, that doesn't need to know how to deal with the entire operation, but someone who is equipped enough to be able to identify a breach and to be able to look at a screen, to be able to look at their tools that they've got and say, guys, we've been hit, and take the necessary action, to be able to identify, react, and respond to a breach, and then get the professionals in, and then get the SWAT team in, as it were, to clean up, to fix up, and to continue going. The cost of that reputational damage, the longer a breach is allowed to infiltrate a network. And now don't forget, Joe, that people are working in hybrid environments. Some people are in the office and some people are home. So once a breach attacks an infrastructure, it's now attacking homes as well. It's now not only attacking the four walls of the office, it's attacking homes. And all of our devices are on all our software and all our programs are on our cell phones. We get our emails to our cell phones, our streaming platforms are on our cell phones, our CRMs are on our cell phones. So once a breach has infiltrated a business, it's got the propensity to do damage in a business capacity and in a personal capacity, because very few companies have business cell phones and personal cell phones. Some do, some don't. But do we want to take that risk? So to have an in-house resource that you're able to upskill, to be able to identify, react, and respond to a breach as quickly as possible could save a business, could save livelihoods, could save jobs, could save a lifetime of investment by individuals. Larger organizations, it could save reputational damage from clients. What data gets exposed to the outside elements? How is that data being exposed to the outside elements? Is it a vengeance attack? Is it just an opportunistic attack? Do we want to wait to find out the motivation behind an attack? Or do we want to be able to identify an attack as quickly as possible and shut it down with minimal cost, minimal downtime, minimal infrastructural and reputational damage, and then be back up and running?
Yeah, you raised so many good points there, Dave. And I think it is a bit of a paradigm shift for us to start thinking about, we have a lot of, there's a lot of precedent for upskilling people within organizations into different roles that perhaps they haven't done before. Yeah, I every day I'll interact with people that are in a safety role or a risk role or a security role. And you look at their work experience and they started off in accounts, or they started off as a project manager, or they started off like in something completely unrelated. Then the opportunity arose and we, organizations have invested in them. They've sent them off on courses, or they've just put them under the tutelage of someone and they've learned the skills. So we know we can do this in a whole bunch of different areas within our organization. And sometimes these people become very, very important to the overall running of a function that has a high consequence for the organization. So it's not like we're putting them into nothing roles. Yeah, I've seen someone with a global head of security job title that had no security experience before they started with that company. Granted, they've been there 15 years, but I mean, that's one of those things that we know we can do. So we shouldn't be treating cyber as this weird anomaly that unless the person has a master's degree in computer science and they've grown up coding, that they can't possibly be doing it. You never know what capability is dormant within your organization. It could be there's someone working in admin, working in marketing, someone who's working on the field even, that just has an interest in this, a passion in this, or a natural aptitude for this. And what's the cost in sending them an assessment and just seeing how they go. And maybe they don't even realize they're interested in it until you tell them, actually, you're off the charts on this. This could be something that you're really good at. And you never know. It could just be the thing that person's been never considered, but all of a sudden becomes super passionate about because it's something that speaks to them.
You know, Joe, I get this question a lot. People that think they have an interest in cybersecurity, people that potentially want to get involved in cybersecurity. And the question that I often get is, how do I know if I'll make it through the program? How do I know if I'll be good enough? And the pre-program assessment is designed in such a way to not necessarily ascertain right and wrong answers, but to understand the processing of one's mind and to understand how a person's mind will cope through the systems required to become a cybersecurity analyst. And that self-doubt, because it's associated with this brand that we spoke about, the dark, faceless individual with the hoodie and the dungeon and a lot of people aren't like that and don't believe that they'll necessarily have a career in cybersecurity because it's all about programming in ones and zeros and all of these sorts of things. And that's exactly what cybersecurity is not. We know that that's what it's not. Cybersecurity is exactly, it's an infrastructure that is built on processing and built on a methodology rather than ones and zeros. And this is what people need to understand. I go back to the famous quote or a famous conversation that two CEOs were having between each other. And the one CEO said to the other CEO, how do you feel about training staff? What happens if we train staff and they just end up leaving us? To which the second CEO responded, what happens if we don't and they stay?
Yeah.
That's a far greater problem that we need to address. We need to ensure that we equip our staff well enough to be able to leave, but provide an environment in which they want to stay. And this is what's going to lift our organizations, and this is what's going to lift our companies, is that as a business, we all have a responsibility to educate. We have a responsibility to our individual staff members who make the company. It's the sum of the individuals that make the whole. We all know that. And we have a responsibility to our business, all the hard work and effort that we have spent so many years building, lifetimes. People have invested their entire savings into their businesses, and to fall short at something which can easily be remedied and something which can easily be dealt with, and risk your entire business and risk your entire livelihood on it, it doesn't really make sense, does it, Joe? It's that just mind shift that we need to sort of change to get into that way of thinking and saying, well, do I really want to build my home entertainment center, my home theater system, before I put the roof over my house and before I've made my roof watertight? Or would I rather make my house watertight, make the environment secure, and then I can put the home entertainment center in? And this is exactly what's happening, is that I mentioned that the 18th project on the cards was cybersecurity. What was number one? Number one was API, gateways, and management, which is important, and that's great. But what does API and management use? It exposes the company to an even greater degree of cyber threat. So we're developing elements of cybersecurity, and we're developing products which are very necessary to the profitability of our businesses, but increasing our cyber threat. So should we not be closing our cyber goal as much as possible and achieving our cyber posture, improving our cyber posture, achieving our cyber posture target as much as possible before we start exposing ourselves to greater cybersecurity risk?
Yeah, fully agree, Dave. All right, just as we close up, because we're coming up on time, if people want to learn more about CTIA or they want to be able to share an assessment, where can they go for more information?
So our website is our best place to go to, www.cyber-tech.institute. It's a very informative website. It's a very interactive website. There's a link to our assessment over there. We'd love to share it with you. And even if you're just shooting the breeze, and even if you just feel like taking the assessment, it will be very interesting for us to know what type of individuals out there. Even if you don't progress into a career in cyber, it will be very interesting to to gather that information and to be able to share with people and say, hey, these are people that are doing our assessment. There are people like this in your organization. Go and look for them, upskill them. It will only be good for them as an individual, and it will only be good for you as a company.
Perfect way to close it out. Thank you very much, Mr. Dave Cohen from Cybertech Institute of Australia. Pleasure always to talk to you, and look forward to doing it again in the future.
Joe, an absolute pleasure as always. You inspire us. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man.
Take care.